Welcome into Critical Thinking. I'm Andrew Coppens, your host with the most numbers right here on Mojo 50 Radio. It's 5 p.m. Central Time on Saturday, and that means one thing and one thing only. It's time to put some thinking caps on. That's right. It is the show with the most numbers. It's all about facts over narratives on this show. You can find me on social media, interact with this show live and direct. You can hear it on iHeartRadio. You can hear it on Spreaker. You can hear it on mojo50.com. You can see the show over at the Mojo 50 Radio Facebook page, Mojo 50 Radio's Facebook page. That's right. The show is audio and visual for whatever pleasure you might get into. Of course, if you can't listen live or see the show live, you will be able to download the show on your podcasting platform of choice. I suggest either Stitcher or Radio Public for that, but that's just me. You do what makes you happy. But what would really make me happy is going over to my YouTube page where you can see the show in its entirety after its live air, youtube.com/Andrew Coppens, youtube.com/Andrew Coppens, and of course at The Coppens Show. Like I said, my last name, if you're new to the show, is Coppens, spelled Coppens. All right, all the self-plugging out of the way. I have got to level with you, so come on in a little bit closer, just a little bit more. Okay, so I've got to level with you, the viewer and the listener, because I feel like I've actually been failing you a ton as of late. How so? Well, you know, I claim to be the host with the most numbers right here on Mojo 50 Radio. Over the past few months, I feel like I've given you less and less numbers and more straight up opinion. And that changes today because I, your humble host, Andrew Coppens, pledged to do more numbers and less straight up opinion going forward. Now, that doesn't mean that we changed the theme of the show in 2020, which has been all about changing the culture. In fact, I would suggest there's a lot of culture changing that needs to be done based off of the news of this week. So what is going to be coming up on today's show? Well, first off, I promise I will not talk down to you boomer rubes that voted for Donald Trump, aka Don Lemon's favorite people. But I'm going to be talking about that freak out over Don Lemon's comments from last weekend, and I'm going to bring you an update to the wealth inequality debate that seems to keep coming up month over month, and probably try to prove to you why Republicans, or at least conservatives, because Republicans and conservatives probably not the same thing these days, really need to counter the narrative. Why they need to, how they can do it, which is going to dovetail very nicely into the entire missed segment from last week, which was my Socialism Sucks segment about the claim by AOC about exploitation and capitalism. So 2 birds, 1 stone, anybody? Oh, and that's right. It is also pandemic time, except for that I'm struggling to get to this whole pandemic thing when you actually stop the freak out and look at some basic facts. But let's go ahead and start today's show off with some Don Lemon and the elites spinning on your radio dial. Okay, maybe that's a good band name for a punk rock band or something. But anyway, by now you've likely heard CNN and likely seen the video of CNN anchor Don Lemon and his 2 guests. I think it's Rick Wilson and Jeet Wahad or somebody like that. But anyway, his 2 guests, they let everybody know what they think about Donald Trump voters. Now, by now, you've also heard the entire outrage spectrum humanly possible from the right side of the aisle. You know, the whole how dare he, and this is something real elites think, see, ha ha ha, and how arrogant, and the don't you dare tell me we're the divisive ones on the right anymore. All of those outrage scenarios that came flying in real quick on this one. Now, that doesn't mean that in this case, I guess maybe there isn't room for us to point it out, okay? Now, there is some right to be outraged here because, let's face it, Don Lemon and his guests were about as bigoted and ignorant as humanly possible when it comes to this. There are Donald Trump voters of all stripes, from low-income southern backwoods to the backwoods of Wisconsin to, you know, the wealthiest of people in Chicago and New York and all over the world, and to the smartest people out there. Okay? That's where the ignorance of Donald Trump voters come in. And so I get the outrage, mainly because it was insulting as all get out. But notice something that I haven't done yet. Play the actual segment, and I refuse to play it. And that's for two reasons. Number one on my list of reasons for refusing to play this is because this is not a surprise to me, and it shouldn't be to you. We all know that this is what they think, okay? We all know that they think this. We've known this for a very long time. Don Lemon and his guests just proved it, right? In a pretty dramatic kind of a way. Now, the other part of this is that if we want to change the culture, if we want to really change how our media works, we have got to, me and you, we have got to be the ones that change this behavior. And how do you do that? One, you give it no quarter, meaning you give it no air. I don't need to play this segment. And if you want to find it, go ahead and be my guest. But every time you do so, you give CNN more of what they want, which is more clickbait, which is more airtime and more people tuning in, right? Potentially, that's kind of the thought here. But also, why should you be outraged? Like I said, this is not a surprise. Why would you be outraged that they said it if you already knew that they thought it? Okay? Now, for me, this is also a perfect example of when to let it go. Like I said, this isn't surprising. Let it go. There's no need to outrage, Hulk smash. There's no need to go into that. But there is a need to keep this in the back of your mind and use it at the right time. And I would make an argument that now is not the right time. But, of course, the GOP, the grand old party, could not help themselves. They pounced on this right away because outrage, right? Outrage. And it also means that idiots, I'm not saying Donald Trump voters, I'm saying idiots will give them money because of the ad. The RNC is going to rake in money hand over fist because of this type of an ad. Meanwhile, the RNC is slashing and dicing and doing everything they can to be against conservatives and populists. And I want you to flash back all the way to 2016. What did the RNC actively do during that 2016 campaign? It actively played favorites, just like the DNC did between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. I mean, that was a little bit more of the rigging of the system, am I right? I mean, they basically rigged the system to make sure that Bernie Sanders, no matter what happened, wasn't going to win on the DNC side. But the RNC actively tried everything humanly possible, propping up George Bush, propping up Jeb Bush, propping up Marco Rubio, propping up all of these different candidates to try to take down Donald Trump. Donald Trump was a disaster, according to the RNC, according to all the power structures within the Republican base in Washington, D.C. The RNC was not your friend if you were a Donald Trump voter in 2016, and certainly has not been a friend of real conservatism or real libertarian economic thought within the Republican Party for decades now. But they effectively used this to put out an ad, and they're going to gobble in tons of money because of it. I would say that this is something that Donald Trump should be using, not the RNC. Because what Donald Trump could do is wait. Use it in September and October. Frame the debate using the words of people who are Democratic propagandists at CNN. Use those words against him. I'm not saying don't use it. Don't use emotion. I'm not saying don't do those things, okay? I'm saying you should, but there's a time and a place. And September is the time and place to do that if you're Donald Trump, because it's the most effective tool in your tool belt. Using it now, way too soon. Especially if you know it's going to be Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders that end up winning the Democratic nomination. That is when you use this. You say, defend that position, because that is the position of the Elizabeth Warrens and Bernie Sanders. It is their position that you're too stupid to know best. Make them defend it. Make them say that they don't believe that, and then prove it. Because that is the whole point here. You start dividing the left from the left, right? And then you also activate your base. You use the emotion of the ignorance of leftist elites. That's what you do. Now, there is some good news in all of this sort of bad news, ignorant scenario. Nobody watched. No one was watching. First, because it actually aired on Saturday night at like 10 or 11 o'clock. And secondly, because it's freaking CNN. Sorry, I almost uttered the F word there. So, like I said up front, I want to use numbers, not just opinion. And here's how I know no one was watching and why nobody should be outraged. Because here are the numbers for the night, the ratings. And tell me, based off of these ratings, just how outraged you actually should be. Don Lemon's show, at its peak, was 186,000 people watching. Greg Gutfeld's show, The Greg Gutfeld Show, on Fox News, 420,000 at the same time as Don Lemon's show hit its peak. Jesse Waters and his Waters World show, a repeat from earlier in the night, airing at 11 p.m. Eastern Time, 232,000 to 162,000 for the second hour of Don Lemon. Literally, no one was paying attention to this. So what? He said out loud what the left actually thinks and what we all knew they already thought. Here's a news flash if you're a Donald Trump voter. You've already won. Number one, Donald Trump is in the White House. And number two, nobody watches CNN. Why should you be outraged over something literally no one paid attention to? How do I know nobody was paying attention to it? Because it took 48 hours for the right to come out and say, ha ha, told you so, ha 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 ha. 48 hours for the outrage on the right-wing media types to come on board. Why be outraged? Why let the media's culture of outrage selling win here? Why? Don't be the person that gets into this. Just don't. Changing the culture, right? We talked about changing it from the media. It means changing the media culture first and foremost, like I said last week. So one way would be to stop watching those media types. The ratings mean no one was fucking watching. Nobody was watching. Literally no one. Again, it took 48 hours for the right to get all outraged on the media side of things. If this was truly worth the outrage, why wasn't it an immediate pounce? You mean to tell me that nobody on the right was watching Don Lemon for this very type of a situation? People at the Daily Wire or the Blaze or Red State or whatever other website you want to come up with from the right side. I get it. All this outrage that's filling you up. Hulk smash. Let's just take a moment and let's laugh. Let's laugh at the fact that it did take almost 48 hours to get anybody to pay attention to any words that Don Lemon had to speak. Okay? Let's laugh at the fact that he thinks he's so self-important that this was a funny thing to say. And yet nobody was paying attention. I think it's hilarious. Who gives a crap? You are literally not worth time or time to be outraged over. I'm not outraged over it. I'm only talking about the reaction. I haven't played your segment one time. Let's also take a moment to laugh at the fact that these people preach tolerance and love wins, and yet they attempt to sow the seeds of divide every time humanly possible. This was the most idiotic, this was the most enlightening, and it was the most unbelievably bigoted thing I have ever seen on air when it comes to politics. But let's laugh at the fact that these people are hypocrites. Let's laugh, not be outraged. Let's laugh. I don't know about you, but I kind of need a pick-me-up after that really depressing segment. Oh, and the fact that we're already in February. Yes, it is February 1st, and that means we're just 14 days away from the most made-up holiday for love on your calendar. Well, maybe not the most. I think that would be Sweetest Day. But anyway, the day that us guys are screwed out of our hard-earned money because we're supposed to tell our wives that we love them, when we should be doing that every day to begin with, my fine friends. If you don't do that, I suggest even the smallest way, whether that is, doing something extra on the chore list, or, finding a way to maybe pick up the kids when your wife was supposed to, or, just simply saying, hey, babe, I love this about you. Doing those things matter much more. But anyway, I know we're all going to fall into it. I've already gotten my plans together, but if you want a quality way to say love, may I suggest to you that Mojo 50 has teamed up with APR Coffee and the Bells of Liberty, which can be heard every Saturday on here, Mojo 50 network, on this little network here. Before my show, a few hours, you can hear Bells of Liberty, okay? APR Coffee, Bells of Liberty, they're going to give you the taste of Valentine's. This is a truly limited edition run of a recipe created to entice your senses. Everybody loves chocolate-covered strawberries, right? Chocolate-covered strawberries, who can't? And it seems to be the number one seller in February. So we're going to take it a step further with APR Coffee by producing 100 bags only of carefully crafted roasted chocolate-covered strawberry coffee. Each order comes in a specially designed bag representing Valentine's Day and is numbered 1 to 100. This promotion will only run up to Valentine's Day or the 100th bag sold, whichever comes first. All it takes, a $14 donation to mojo50.com. Donate $14, mojo50.com/donate, and you get this amazing one-time Bells of Liberty Valentine's coffee. When the promotion's over, the recipe will be destroyed. So don't forget, a simple $14 donation for a bag of coffee to mojo50.com. What can't be beat there? Seriously, folks, I love APR Coffee, and this is going to be something that I purchase. Don't tell the wife. Anyway, look, no story has dominated the news week this week like the great pandemic coming our way, courtesy of coronavirus. So if you want to say I love you to your loved ones, hug them real tight. Don't forget the coronavirus is around the corner. Not really, but folks, every single newscast, every front page of your local newspaper, every cable news outlet is covering the outbreak in China, which has now spread to other parts of the world because travel. Look, here's the deal. I get wanting to protect yourself from the unknown and from the potentially deadly. But let me ask you one very simple question here. Do you freak out over getting the flu? I really want to know. Do you think twice about touching anything in public? Or do you wear a mask to make sure you're not contracting or spreading virus? I really want to know the answer, because if not, and you are here freaking out over coronavirus, I call you hypocrite. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be paying attention to coronavirus, but this almighty freakout just is not adding up to me. It just doesn't add up. So let's start with the basic facts. Instead of freaking out, let's start with the basis of coronavirus. Let's let the World Health Organization help frame our discussion a little bit here. All things aside, they're getting viruses pretty spot on. So here's what you need to know. Yes, coronavirus is more contagious than the flu or previously SARS, because it passes not from one person to one person, but one person likely infects, 2.5 people or more at a time. So it is highly contagious. And here's why it's also a little bit dangerous, because it can be transmitted without you ever knowing that you've got symptoms. Symptoms do not have to be present for the incubation period and therefore the transmission, which makes containing this virus more difficult unless you just quarantine everybody for weeks at a time, right? So those are the basic facts of the coronavirus and how dangerous it really is. So yes, that means depending on the quarantine success, this could be something that is quickly dealt with, or it could last a long time. Now, we also have the fact that it did originate in China to deal with, and anybody that claims that they know exactly how these numbers are really working out, what the estimates really are, what's really going on in Wuhan, China, in the province of that area, they don't, because China tends to not be, the most truthful situation out there. That's just the issue at hand. But let's take a look at some numbers, okay? Let's take a look and ask yourself, when you really break down the numbers, what should you be most worried about? Just going to give you raw numbers. 15 million people sick. 140,000 hospitalized. 8,200 have been killed. Now let's compare those numbers to these numbers. 9,800 infected, 213 people killed. You tell me which is more serious, requires us to be more vigilant, and should be more worth our collective freak out. Well, guess what? Those first numbers that I gave you are the numbers from the regular flu in the United States of America. Those second numbers, those are the latest known numbers as of this recording of confirmed cases of coronavirus in the entire world. The entire world. All 213 people that are dead are in China. Just 98 cases exist, including 8 human-to-human cases of spread in the rest of the world. Take that versus 8,200 people dead just in the United States in one flu season. Worldwide flu deaths are estimated at 650,000 a year. Not all time, but in a single year. Is the media freaking you out on a daily basis about the flu? Do you see anything other than the flu shot time? It's flu season. Do you see anything? No. Now, I also know these numbers. 6 people dead in China as of January 22nd. Fast forwarding a week, it's now up to 213. That is a hell of an increase, but it's all in China, and there's literally zero squadoosh dead people from the virus's 98 confirmed cases as of January 31st outside of China. It's also worth noting that the vaccine for this may be a bit away, and preventing travel to and from the region is the smart thing to do here to avoid spreading a virus that has no vaccine any further. But let's critically think here, people. Come on. One of these is deadly every single year. One of them you've never heard about until now, and yet the outrage and clickbait media will only have you on edge over one of these two things. Perhaps a little bit of perspective would be good here. I'm not saying do not take precautions, but they would be the same precautions that doctors and nurses would tell you ad nauseum to take with the flu. Avoid direct contact with anybody, wash your hands frequently, and don't touch things in public spaces. I'm going to give you a little bit more perspective here. In 2018-19's flu season, 42.9 million people got the flu. 647,000 people were hospitalized and 61,200 people dead. In 2017 and 18, 48.8 million were sick. 959,000 hospitalized and 79,400 people were dead. Now, you tell me which one of these is a pandemic out of the two. Just saying. I'm going to leave that food for thought for you. On the flip side, we're going to be talking about wealth inequality. We're going to talk about the UK leaving the EU, and of course, so much more right here on Mojo 50 Radio. I know you had a little bit of a break. Thank God Almighty after that wonderful talk of the coronavirus. But you know me, I'm your host with the most numbers here on Mojo 50 Radio, Andrew Coppens. And of course, you're tuned into Critical Thinking. Thank you so much for coming back for the second half of this show. Now, I told you that we would tackle a little bit of socialism sucks and wealth inequality explained again. We will get into that in a bit, but before we get into those big time numbers on today's episode, it's time to celebrate our friends in Great Britain and their independence from the European Union, if I could say that 2 times fast. But Nigel Farage, well, if you haven't been paying attention, that dude has some serious stones. And how do I know that? Well, here's his speech on the floor of the European Parliament as he said goodbye to the EU and gave the ultimate middle finger.
So this is it, the final chapter, the end of the road. A 47-year political experiment that the British, frankly, have never been very happy with. My mother and father signed up to a common market, not to a political union, not to flags, anthems, presidents, and now you even want your own army. For me, it's been 27 years of campaigning and over 20 years here in this Parliament. I'm not particularly happy with the agreement we're being asked to vote on tonight, but Boris has been remarkably bold in the last few months, and Ms von der Leyen, he's made it clear, he's promised us there'll be no level playing field. And on that basis, I wish him every success in the next round of negotiations. I really do. But the most significant point is this. What happens at 11 p.m. this Friday, the 31st of January, 2020, marks the point of no return. Once we've left, we are never coming back, and the rest, frankly, is detail. We're going, we will be gone. And that should be the summit of my own political ambitions. I walked in here, as I've said before, you all thought it was terribly funny. You stopped laughing in 2016. But my view has changed of Europe since I joined. In 2005, I saw the Constitution that had been drafted by Giscard and others. I saw it rejected by the French in a referendum. I saw it rejected by the Dutch in a referendum. And I saw you in these institutions ignore them, bring it back as the Lisbon Treaty and boast you could ram it through without there being referendums. Well, the Irish did have a vote and did say no and were forced to vote again. You're very good at making people vote again, but what we've proved is the British are too big to bully, thank goodness. So I became an outright opponent of the entire European project. I want Brexit to start a debate across the rest of Europe. What do we want from Europe? If we want trade, friendship, cooperation, reciprocity, we don't need a European Commission. We don't need a European Court. We don't need these institutions and all of this power. And I can promise you, both in UKIP and indeed in the Brexit Party, we love Europe. We just hate the European Union. It's as simple as that. So I'm hoping this begins the end of this project. It's a bad project. It isn't just undemocratic, it's anti-democratic, and it puts in that front row. It gives people power without accountability. People who cannot be held to account by the electorate, and that is an unacceptable structure. Indeed, there's an historic battle going on now across the West, in Europe, America, and elsewhere. It is globalism against populism. And you may loathe populism, but I tell you a funny thing, it's becoming very popular. And it has great benefits. No more financial contributions, no more European Court of Justice, no more common fisheries policy, no more being talked down to, no more being bullied, no more Guy Verhofstadt. I mean, what's not to like? I know you're going to miss us. I know you want to ban our national flags, but we're going to wave you goodbye. and will look forward in the future to working with you as sovereign.
If you disobey the rules, you get cut off. Could we please remove the flags? Mr. Farage, could we remove the flags, please?
That's it. It's all over. Finished. We've gone.
Could I please ask for quiet? Please sit down, resume your seats, put your flags away, you're leaving, and take them with you if you are leaving now. And goodbye. Can I just say, if I may say, just in a slight reference, the word hate was used in the last contribution. And I really think, given what we listened to prior to this, that we should not hate anyone or any nation or any people.
That, folks, was pure glory. And if you're not watching at home, which you should be by going to the Mojo 50 Radio Facebook page, or if you're listening via the podcast, head over to youtube.com/Andrew Coppens, youtube.com/Andrew Coppens. That simple. But if you weren't watching, then you missed the utter look of disdain and hate coming from that lady, Mairead McGuinness, I believe, who dressed down the Brexit Party group and then lectured everybody how we shouldn't hate anybody. But if looks could have killed, if looks would have told you hatred, she was expressing that in and of herself. I mean, the irony was so strong there. It sure sounded like a ton of jealousy was coming from the members of the EU Parliament. So welcome back, sovereignty, baby. But speaking of jealousy, I mean, actually speaking of inequality, because we've all got to speak the leftist language, am I right? Which brings us to the everlasting claim of the left of rising wealth inequality. Two recent articles have given more light to this debate, one in which, well, the left is going to like, and the other not exactly a great set of numbers for them. As CBS News wants us all to know, reporting on Friday, there's an estimated $98 trillion, with a T, trillion dollars of wealth in the United States. But it's CBS News, so let's go ahead and divide and conquer with socialism. All right, folks, so when we talk about this situation, what they wanted us to know at CBS News is that 20% of people have 90% of that $98 trillion pie, with the bottom 20% only having 10% of the wealth. Or as they like to put it, if we've got a magical 10-piece pie of wealth, 9 pieces go to the wealthy, 1 piece to the upper and middle classes combined, and then the lower middle class gets 0.3% of that pie, basically the crumbs. Now, all of this is allegedly based on the findings of a group that I've relied on in the past, the National Bureau of Economic Research. So, being the naturally critically thinking and curious person I am, I did my own research, and the numbers, well, they don't really say what they want us to say if you're CBS News. Instead, a little, and I mean a little bit of digging, as in going just beyond the abstract, comes up with gems like this. Quote, the inequality of net worth as measured by the Gini coefficient after almost 2 decades of little movement was up sharply from 2007 to 2010. It then increased moderately from 2010 to 2013 and again from 2013 to 2016, though the wealth share of the top 1% shot up by 2.9 percentage points. Middle-class debt, with the exception of student loans, contracted sharply from 2007 to 2013, but then rose slightly from 2013 to 2016. So what does that mean, right? What the hell does all of that economic speech mean? It means simply this, that as the economy was getting really bad, right, from 2007 through to 2013, as the economy was going bad, right, what did the middle class do? How did wealth inequality spread? Well, it spread because they started to decrease the amount of debt, and so they weren't buying more things, and so their debt decreased. That's a good thing, okay? It contracted. Then it rose slightly from 2013 to 2016. And what happened in 2013 to 2016? Well, there's more buying power because the economy started to grow. And as the economy grows, people tend to buy more things thinking that they're going to be able to pay that debt down further down the road. They keep kicking that can down the road. So the wealth inequality, okay, goes up because the wealthy, they don't have as much debt. They don't need to service as much debt. And so they're able to, as the economy goes down, their ability to weather that storm goes up. Now you see the debt increasing from the middle class and the wealth going like this. Now you get more inequality. See, more debt means less wealth, right? But so you've got the wealthy kind of doing this, and if you're watching, you can see my hands. And now you've got the middle class doing this, allegedly. But it's all about a lie of the shrinking middle class. And I explained why it was a myth a few episodes ago, titled "It's the Great Wealth Tax, Charlie Brown." So if you want the full details, I suggest finding that episode. But the basics that you need to know is that, yes, there is a growing difference between the middle class and the rich. And both articles actually prove this, okay? But it's not for this nefarious reason that the left is telling us and why we need to create this wealth tax. It's because the middle class has actually become more wealthy, not less wealthy. More make $100,000 or more today than ever before while adjusting for inflation. Now we went from just 8% in 1967 making $100,000 or more to just over 27% making $100,000 or more by 2016, adjusted for inflation. Okay? That, my friends, is why the middle class is shrinking, as the left wants us to all know. It's not that they're not gaining wealth. It's precisely because of upward mobility. Now you could haggle and argue, maybe in 2016 terms, that $100,000 is middle class, but you can't do that because the left is using terms and defining middle class as under $100,000, then the lower class is under 35, yada, yada, yada. And the upward middle class would be $100,000 to maybe $500,000 a year, right? So we have to use the same definitions here. But anybody that is telling you that upward mobility is a bad thing is either economically illiterate at best or a damn liar at worst. But we have even more proof that this myth is existing today, courtesy of the left's favorite organization on this entire matter, the CBO, or the Congressional Budget Office. You see, there was a November 2018 report that, well, proves the left's points, allegedly. So according to this report, here is what has happened between 1979 and 2015. Average real income for people in the top fifth of the population rose by 101%, while it rose for people in the bottom quintile by only 32%. For the middle three quintiles, average real income increased by 32% as well. There's just a small problem. The left and the CBO leave out a ton of stuff here, as David Henderson points out in this month's Reason magazine. So let's go over those numbers. Henderson points out that the CBO's numbers leave out taxes and direct government transfers, read welfare, etc. So amazingly, the numbers change dramatically when you understand the actual full picture. According to Henderson, quote, once the CBO researchers subtract taxes and added welfare, Social Security, and so on, the picture changed dramatically for the lowest quintile. Income rose by 79%. For the middle three quintiles, it increased by 46%. For the highest quintile, it went up by 103%, slightly more than before, likely thanks to Ronald Reagan's and George W. Bush's tax cuts. That's the real income growth. That is what this is. Everybody is growing their income. Now, there's also still a problem with the CBO numbers if you just take out taxes and then government transfers and all that stuff, because they use consumer price index to account for inflation. According to Stanford economist Michael Boskin, CPI overestimates inflation by 0.8 to 0.9% annually. So almost 1%. On a single year basis, that would necessarily be nothing considering what we're talking about. But we're actually talking 1979 to 2015. So 1979 to 2015. That's what we would call compound interest. So 0.8 to 0.9 compounded year over year over year is a whole lot. So Henderson accounted for this, and the results are this. If you go with a conservative estimate of 0.08 percentage points and adjust the CBO's after tax, after transfer data accordingly, the top quintile's average real income between 79 and 2015 increased by 168%. The bottom quintile's average real income increased by 136%. Now, yes, there's still a gap between the bottom and the top in terms of how quickly real income rises. But that's the point. It is rising. Everybody is getting more wealthy in the United States of America. The people at the bottom are getting off the bottom faster. The people at the top are getting wealthy. And the people in the middle are moving out and up faster than ever before. Think about that. They're actually also rising faster than the very bottom can replace them inside the middle class. If rising income for all is a crisis for this country, I think we're going to be doing just fine, you idiot, economic, illiterate socialists. Just to further hammer this point home, by the way, purchasing power, what our actual dollars can purchase, has only gotten stronger. Again, from Henderson's article at Reason Magazine for February's edition. Donald J. Boudreau, an economist at George Mason University, has compared the prices of items that you could have bought from a Sears catalog in 1975 with prices for similar items in 2006. He shows that with the average wage in 2006, you would have to spend far less time working to earn enough to buy the items than you would have had to have spent in 1975. Your purchasing power is far greater. Even updating the model for 2019 brings in more good news. A further 30% reduction in the price of goods, right? From 2013 to 2019 alone. So your ability to purchase things actually increased because all of the things that go into purchasing power get better. That means we're having to work less to get the goods that we want, which are actually of higher quality. Just saying. I'm just saying here. The whole point. Wealth inequality is only a problem if one group is getting more wealthy and the others are not increasing as well. This is just a classic socialist class warfare situation. It isn't true. It's not true at all. So please, go out and spread this information as far and wide as humanly possible. Talk down the socialist talking points. Take them down whenever and wherever you hear this crap, okay? This is how we win all of this, by not backing down and not staying silent, but by making them defend a position from a position of weakness. Make them have to defend what they say when presented with these actual facts. Use this. Cut this. I encourage you. Cut this video down. Cut this segment down on your audio. Take this to argue with other people. Now, you may have thought that the last segment was #socialism sucks, but it just so happens to be a precursor to the main event, the undercard, if you will. So today we're going to tackle what AOC had to say way back in January of 2020. You know that old you didn't make your billions, you took your billions chestnut? So let's just hear her comments in full context because I don't want to quote anybody out of context. So now you know why I wanted to preface this conversation with the numbers that we mentioned just a bit ago. I hope you were paying attention because they're going to come in real handy. Now, is there exploitation that happens within capitalism? Yes, it does happen, but not the way that AOC wants to describe it. Remember, she claimed the following: Well, you didn't make those widgets, did you? You sat on a couch while thousands of people were paid modern-day slave wages, and in some cases, real modern-day slavery, depending on where you are in terms of food production. If this idea of slave wages is true, then riddle me this. Why has global poverty dropped like a rock? Why is more than half, yes, more than 50% of the entire world's population are middle class or richer? Damn slave wages. But I want to play for you the words of one of capitalism's most ardent supporters, Yaron Brook of the Ayn Rand Institute. Now, I don't agree with everything the Ayn Rand Institute has to say, but his words give the best defense against this crap idea that AOC and her Democratic Socialist of America puppet masters are giving us.
Cool. Well, I was wondering what your opinion is then when it affects another part, a poor part of the world such as Africa. I mean, the money, Western companies, I mean, they are not their time, that they don't have the choice of labour a lot of the time. Their job is not, like the amount they work is not correlative to how much money they get and how much they need.
How do you get to make that decision for them? I mean, this to me, I get this at every particularly in Europe and in the US as well. This to me is one of the most, anyway. You sit here in Europe in your cushy middle class chairs. I'm serious about this. And you want to judge the African, or let's take the Chinese, because that's why, you know, in Apple or the Indonesian so-called sweatshop or whatever. And you want to tell me that $2 a day is not a dramatic improvement in their life? It is. And there's no way for them to get to the point to be as rich as you are unless they go through that phase. And if you deny them the ability to make $2 a day, by charging $4, by insisting the companies pay $4, and therefore they withdraw completely from the market. Because you know what? I'm not paying $600 for this. I'll pay $300. And if I stop buying this, who suffers? That Chinese kid who's right now making whatever, $3 a day or whatever, right? And his alternative is to go back to the farm. And you know what they did in the farms? 40 years ago, when the Chinese were all producing agriculture, they were dying of starvation. 40 to 60 million Chinese died of starvation under Mao. Suddenly, you've given them opportunity to actually attain middle classhood, to learn a skill, to have a profession, to make money, to make themselves into something. And by the way, the Chinese never complain about how much they're being paid. You guys complain. We complain in the West because, yes, to our middle-class, comfy lives, that seems ridiculous. But that's because you've never lived in real poverty. Nobody in England has lived in real poverty the way the Chinese and the Africans and the Indonesians live. When you go to a place, and it's interesting, because take Korea. Korea is an interesting case study, right? You've got North Korea and South Korea. 50, 60, 70 years ago, South Korea was as poor as North Korea. They were both dirt poor. And then South Korea instituted some economic freedom. And it made it possible for people to go and work for $1 a day, for $2 a day. And they developed skills, and they increased their productivity, and they started building more stuff. And capital came in and increased their productivity even more. And suddenly, and you go to Seoul today, and they're as rich as you are. But in 70 years they did, or 60 years, they did what you've done in hundreds of years. How did they do it? Because of the ability to slowly ratchet up. Now, if you demand that they skip and get to your standard of living like that, then they will stay poor forever. And do you know that over the last 30 years, now this is not my statistic, this is the United Nations, you can look it up online, right? Over the last 30 years, 1 billion, that's with a B, people have come out of poverty in Asia. Why? Because of capitalism, not because of foreign aid. Foreign aid doesn't help anybody, except the dictators who put them in the Swiss bank accounts. What helps poor countries is freedom. You give them the rule of law, you give them property rights, you give them property, you give them capital, you give them a job. That's how you create wealth, not by giving them handouts. So 1 billion people have come out of poverty. Now, I know some people have said, all you guys care about is the rich. Somebody said, what you care about is the rich deserve it. You know what? I don't care about the rich. They don't need taking care of, right? They're doing great. I care about the poor. I care about the poor. And the only system in human history, to help the poor, to help ambitious poor people rise out of poverty and become rich, has been capitalism. Free markets are the only cure for poverty. The only way in which you become rich so you don't have to have poor people.
So how many of you heard any of that from anyone else who supposedly loves free markets? That's my question to you. So, AOC and the rest of your socialist ilk, riddle me how somebody making the choice to voluntarily interact with the economy, volunteer to take a job, is slavery. Now, there's a great example of slave labor and slave wages happening in the world today. It's happening in Qatar as they ramp up to the 2020 World Cup there. The Qatari government has brought in foreign workers, largely on the promise of high wages and big-time money to bring home to countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. But what's happening is they've actually housed them in substandard conditions. They're not paying wages. And, oh, by the way, they have taken their passports until they complete their work. That is literal slavery. That is not slave labor. These people were supposed to make a voluntary decision and then have been put into slavery. Do you hear anybody? Go look it up. Do you hear anybody banging the drum against this? Do you hear FIFA saying, no, we're not going to put the World Cup there anymore? Nope. The arrogance to just sit here and impose our standard of living automatically onto people who are just beginning their rise of freedom and free markets is utter insanity. All I need to do is point out Singapore as a great example of what happens when you embrace free markets, not socialism. How do I know that? Because Singapore completely embraces free markets. Think about this, okay? According to the Heritage Foundation, they're number 2 in economic freedom. So much so that wages are exploding. Think of this. In 2009, the median wage was just over $2,900. In 2019, that median wage is now $4,500. In 1998, the median wage just $1,452 US, which was a record low. That is insane growth in 10, 20 years' time. Oh, and there is no minimum wage requirement in Singapore either. Amazing, their economy doesn't fall apart without government intervention. In fact, getting rid of those large swaths of government intervention actually set them economically free. It's almost as if AOC's economics degree hasn't bothered to, include economic history at all. On that note, it's time for my millennial brother from another mother to take over, Matthew Holloway. His show, The HollowNet, is coming up next right here on Mojo 50 Radio. Don't forget, you can subscribe to the YouTube page, youtube.com, Andrew Coppens, youtube.com/Andrew Coppens. Follow on social media at The Coppens Show. Until next week, stay safe, be smart. Matthew 544.